So this morning, we're going to talk more about this and go on the record with Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. And Mark Levine joining me in studio. Good to have you here in person on Picks on Politics.
Thank you, Dan. Great to be here.
So let's talk about this big announcement from the Manhattan DA, essentially putting illegal smoke shops on notice, right? But let's start from the very beginning, because my question really is, how did we get to a point in New York City where there's over 1,300 illegal smoke shops? It didn't happen overnight.
400 in Manhattan alone. It might not have happened overnight, but this is proliferated very rapidly in this in-between period where we have put in place a regime for legalized sale of cannabis, but the actual dispensaries are just getting opened. And it's in that void that these stores have entered, but it's a problem. It's a problem on a lot of levels. First of all, it's going to choke this nascent industry of legalized cannabis dispensaries, which has been built with equity at the forefront, where licenses are being prioritized for the very communities that were brutalized by the war on drugs. That won't succeed if they have to compete with hundreds and hundreds of unlicensed stores.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know they exist, right? You said 400 in Manhattan. They're selling this illegal marijuana. Big marijuana leaves in the window when you walk by and you see them on the streets, right? So we had Gail Brewer on a couple weeks ago talking about how she was going out there, cracking down, that we knew that there were fines. How much are those fines, and what happens after you get one?
The fines have not worked. The seizure of product has not worked. The fines are in the thousands of dollars. This is a rounding error relative to how much money these stores are making.
Just to be clear, you find somebody, you take their product, they can still open up the next day.
They do open the next day. This is seen as the cost of doing business. The sheriff has actually had several hundred enforcement actions with seizures and fines. It hasn't worked. What the DA announced this week, though, is at a whole nother level. This is going after their leases, using a law that was really pioneered during the drug era of the 90s to go after so-called crack dens, et cetera. So the legal tool is there. It hasn't been used for marijuana, but I think this is going to be much more effective. Letters went out to 400 building owners this week from the district attorney, informing them that they have tenants who are in violation of the law. So I think this is going to have a big impact.
So just walk me through, right, for those who may not know the legal language here. The letter goes out, but what exactly is at stake here? Somebody goes in, finds there's product that's illegal, and what happens? You get evicted?
Actually, the landlord is legally liable for knowingly renting to a store selling an illegal drug. And landlords have nowhere to hide right now because we all know what they're selling. They're putting it in neon lights in the front. And so that's why the DA has gone directly to them with these letters. I think that should spur action. If not, then there will need to be legal proceedings. But I think that letter alone should get results.
So I guess the question is, who is actually enforcing it, right? So the letters go out by the DA, but who's actually enforcing all of this?
There could ultimately be court action and even criminal liability. And I think
how do you get to that point?
Yeah,
someone has to
hoping
find
it doesn't get to that. I think landlords are running businesses. They're not looking for this kind of legal entanglement. They were getting lots of rent from stores that we all knew were selling weed. So I think this will be a decisive action. I'm hoping to see change in the next weeks ahead. As we're opening more dispensaries, we already have 2 licensed in Manhattan, a 3rd one opening tomorrow, Monday, and more on the way. Stay tuned.
Okay, so a survey by the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association says there's actually likely tens of thousands of illicit cannabis businesses, not just the ones that we know of, but then there's all these secret hidden ones as right. So it does sound like a really big job that's out there. You're talking about the legal action, but do you think there's actually, on the front end, needs to be more resources put towards this?
Well, first of all, we have to accelerate the rollout of the licensed businesses, because there are entrepreneurs who want to do the right thing, want to play by the rules, want to pay taxes. By the way, this is better for the consumer as well, because in a licensed shop, you know what you're putting in your body. In an unlicensed shop, you could be getting defective product from California. But we do need to speed that up. I think that's a legitimate complaint, and we are pushing hard on that. In the end, I'm optimistic that we're going to do what no other state has done, roll out an industry which prioritizes equity, which creates wealth for communities that were brutalized during the war on drugs. But that's not going to be easy, and tackling the unlicensed stores is key.
If the legalization wasn't such a big factor, and this is a what-if hypothetical, and I know you're the Manhattan Borough President, not necessarily the mayor or the governor here, but there's a lot of tax money that's coming from the legalization of marijuana. Is the crackdown on these businesses really benefiting the state and city because you want people to spend the money where the tax revenue can then come in.
Well, the state and the city need the revenue that's going to be coming from cannabis sales,
Right.
because that supports schools and parks and other things. Also, a lot of that money is going to be invested in communities of color, which were hit hard during the war on drugs. The illegal stores are not paying taxes. They're mostly running all cash operations, which, by the way, makes them targets for robberies. One of the biggest problems that we've seen in the unlicensed stores is that they're known targets and that the employees are getting held up because they've got thousands or even tens of thousands on hand. So it's also a safety issue for these neighborhoods. And one other thing, Dan, the illicit stores are selling to kids.
Right.
They're selling products labeled like cotton candy
Right.
and sugary sounding fruity names. They're appealing to kids. They are selling to kids, which is also a real danger.
Yeah, crackdown is a good thing. I'm not pushing back on it, saying it needs to happen, seriously.
Yeah.
While I do have you here, I want to talk about affordable housing. I saw your tweet last week talking about how the rent is obviously skyrocketing in your borough of Manhattan. It is just unaffordable when you look at the picture here, right? And so you've spoken about this. We had Governor Hochul on the Pixel Morning News last week talking about this, taking office space, making it affordable housing. It sounds like a great idea when you talk about it, but in reality, is it actually possible?
It is possible. There are challenges. We actually put out a plan about a week and a half ago where we identified almost 200 sites around the borough where you can create housing and affordable housing. We have huge opportunities. The empty office buildings are a part of it. And if you look at Lower Manhattan, I think it both shows what can be done and the challenges.
Right, but they're talking about Midtown. There's huge office buildings in Midtown.
Yes. The conversions were successful in Lower Manhattan after 9/11 because they tend to be pre-World War II era and smaller floor plates. Midtown, like the building we're sitting in now, tend to be more 70s and 80 eras building with very big floor plates, and that doesn't work as well for apartment layouts. So there's going to have to be changes in the regulations. You're going to have to be very flexible on that. There's probably going to have to be some tax incentives to cover the cost. At the end of the day, Dan, some of these older office buildings are probably going to have to be torn down and replaced with buildings designed for apartments because the older floor plans are just too challenging.
Yeah, the code and the idea of having a window in every room
Yes.
for a window for it to be a bedroom doesn't
That's the
necessarily
law.
work when your windows are on the outside of the building. So, again, in reality, this is not something that's going to happen in the next couple of months or years.
It will be time consuming for sure. I mean, any housing solution doesn't happen overnight. It has to be measured in years. We did put on the table sites and neighborhoods for 73,000 units, some of which could have shovels in the ground this year.
Okay.
So I think there is opportunity in the short term. We need to talk about Midtown office conversions for sure, but I think you're right to have some realistic expectations about when and how much can be done.
All right, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, good to have you here
Thank you,
in
Dan.
studio to talk about all
Pleasure
these
always.
important topics.